We came out of the sky. As silent as the desert night had proven to be in those handful of moments after the sunset, Eric wasn't the least bit surprised to hear the crunching footsteps on the trail behind him and catch a glimpse of the cell phone flashlight as it shined its guiding light out of the cover of bramble bushes and into the makeshift, man-made campsite Eric had laid claim to. He knew that his own campfire served as a lighthouse to his arriving friend Travis, who materialized out of the darkness with his light and chose the seat on the fallen log beside Eric without a word, pocketing his flashlight and withdrawing a cigarette in the same movement. "Those were some good tunes you were listening to on your way down the mountain," Eric commented, finishing off his own cig and tossing the butt into the crackling flames. "I wondered why you turned it off so far from the campsite." Travis did not respond and proceeded to breathe heavily, breaking out into a coughing fit at the first drag of his cigarette. "And you've been rushing to get here? Jogging even? Since when have you ever broken a sweat if you could help it?" Eric asked, studying the crawling shadows on his friend's plaster face. "On any normal camping trip, this would have been your 12th cigarette break on your way down the mountain. I wasn't expecting you for another 20 minutes. "Just drop it, all right?" Travis shot back. "Why'd you turn off the music? How many times have you ruined the perfect quiet of the outdoors like this with your death metal music? To what do I owe this golden silence?" "If you like the quiet so much, then why are you talking now?" Travis huffed. "Seriously, something's up." Eric stood up and squared himself in front of his friend. "Did you bring the fireworks? I brought the guns. Please tell me you didn't forget them in the car and that's why you're acting so spineless." Travis whipped the pack off his back and tossed it to his high school friend's feet. "They're all in there." Eric didn't waste a moment in hungrily leafing through the contents and spreading out the explosives in the sand, dangerously close to the fire pit. "So what should we fire off first? The guns or these?" Eric pressed on. "Can we just sit here a minute so I can catch my breath?" "Damn!" Travis snapped. "Seriously, what the hell happened to you on your way down the mountain? We must have hiked these trails a million times together, at later hours than this. We're in the middle of nowhere, in the Arizona desert. It's hardly hospitable enough for a rat to come biting on that tail you've tucked between your legs." "You didn't hear what I heard on the trail," Travis roared back, which caused his voice to come bouncing back to them from the surrounding hills in an eerie echo that left them both silent for a handful of heartbeats. "So you admit you're craving about something you heard in the trees," Eric finally scoffed, returning to his chore of sorting through their goods with his back turned. "Let me guess." An owl blinked its big eyes at you and swooped low over your head. "He probably hates your sorry excuse for music as much as I do." "It wasn't what I heard, but what I saw. What I felt," Travis growled. "You weren't there. You didn't feel how dead the trail felt. How everything froze like I'd entered a painting or something. People talk about that feeling of being watched, but it's real. There's no describing it. But it's like there's a magnifying glass above your head and you're the insect." Eric barked laughter. "What are you going on about? I never took you for such a pussy." "There was something behind the tree, watching me," Travis roared back, standing up to kick dirt in Eric's general direction. "I had the music on my phone turned all the way up, but I stepped into a pocket of static. I don't know how to describe it. It felt like a vacuum, and all the matter was being sucked out of the air around me. And people say that they know when someone's watching them, and when they look behind them, there's the guy staring. That's what happened. I looked to my left, out of instinct or some shit, and I saw the thing peeking out from behind a tree. When I pointed my flashlight at it, I saw its big bug eyes light up like reflectors, and it slinked back behind the tree." Eric finally turned to look up at his friend, but he hadn't lost his smile quite yet. "Okay, so you saw something with eyes. The number of things that fall into that category could fill a dictionary. So what?" "It was something upright. It had bony shoulders, and the hands were like claws. It wasn't human, I'm telling you. My flashlight was on it, but its skin stayed black. It almost seemed to swallow all light that touched it, except for its eyes. Man, I'm telling you, the trees in the dark, especially with shadows kicked up by a flashlight, can start playing tricks with your eyes," Eric continued. "I don't think you should be so worked up over some shadow thing in the night. It could have been an optical illusion." "No! You weren't there. You didn't see it. I'm sorry I said anything." Travis sat down hard on the log, but he wasn't facing the fire. He was looking back the way he'd come, at the entrance to the hiking trail, and he was holding one of Eric's revolvers in his hands, which he'd grabbed from Eric's gear. "If it'll make you feel any better, we'll both go up the trail with my lanterns, and we'll both have guns." Eric punctuated this statement by cocking the hammer back on his own .44 Magnum. Whatever creeper you saw in the trees won't stand a chance. And at best, we'll come back tired and hungry. And hey, if we do bag a Bigfoot, then we'll be pioneers of the scientific community. Stop fucking around. This thing was in my head. Don't you get it? Travis snapped. It can infect the environment it's in, get under your skin and make you feel its anger. It wasn't happy I was blasting that music. It hated I was there. And that was a warning. What do you think it'll do when I go tromping back up into its domain with a friend and weapons? You're giving this coyote way more credit than it deserves, Eric said. Coyote? Did you hear what I just said? It was standing upright. What the fuck is that? Eric followed the direction of Travis's pointing hand, surprisingly away from the hills, behind them, and up into the night sky. Eric glanced briefly up at the twinkling diamond-encrusted dome above his head and then retraced the line back to Travis's shaking arm, still upraised. What? What am I supposed to be looking at? I swear, if this is your idea of it, shut the fuck up and look! Travis burst up and pointed his gun into the sliver of sky that was troubling him, and Eric was able to pick out a star brighter than all the rest, blinking and strobing, much more prominently than its neighbors, but still in the characteristic wheelhouse of a star. Can you feel that? It's the vacuum I felt on the trail. It's sucking the air out of my lungs, tapping my energy, Travis cried. What is? The fucking star? Listen to yourself, man, Eric barked. Travis diverted from his dead stare into the night sky to shoot a mad glare Eric's way, complete with glassy, roving eyes. Look at that star and tell me it's ordinary. Eric looked again and was surprised to see that it was much brighter than before. It no longer took him a few seconds to reclaim its position in the sky, and he could swear that it was in a different place altogether, now nestled in the cradle of a different constellation, and it was strobing more violently now, robbing Eric of the blinks that he so sorely wanted to bring to this captivating stare, this established connection between him and the star that seemed to want to draw him in, pull him closer like the vacuum Travis had described. Eric managed to close his eyes, and when he looked again, the star was flashing a Christmas green. You see that, right? That's not fucking normal, Travis challenged. I mean, I've seen meteorites burn up with green light before. You think that's a fucking meteor? And now it was moving, appearing to grow in size until it was as big as any full moon on any normal, cloudless night. It is moving like a meteor, Eric said, but there was a quiver of doubt in his voice. As he spoke, he could feel the teeth rattle in his head, and the desert wind had stopped blowing across their campsite. The fire had stopped crackling. The sparks had stopped flaring. Everything had frozen except for them and the flames in the fire pit, which were slowly diminishing, the light growing ever dimmer. A crippling wave of fear overcame Eric, and it was so debilitating and heart-stopping that he could only describe it as something alien, something outside of himself that was hitting him like a tsunami, threatening to flood his lungs and carrying his rock-heavy body down to the deepest, blackest depths of the ocean. Eric was suddenly locked away in all that darkness, and he struggled to breathe, thrashing in his invisible current on his fight for life to the water's surface. It's in my head, Travis screamed. He cocked his head and lined up his sight with the ball of light in the sky, now rushing down on them like the comet it pretended to be, suddenly flashing orange, red, purple, and blue. Eric didn't even hear the gunshot as Travis unloaded his chamber into the night sky. He was too busy staring with mad fascination as the light shined its aggressive spotlight down on them, and only on them. The radiation of its light cut through their clothes. The radiation of its light cut through their clothes, their skin, tapping uncomfortably with the marrow of their bones. And Eric screamed with all of his life force inside his mind as its rainbow-colored radiance whitewashed his senses, separating his consciousness from his body. The fireworks! He heard Travis yell, and then he felt the explosive waves of heat from the exploding canisters of gunpowder as they ricocheted off his body and plucked at his eardrums. But still he didn't hear them, only his own childlike screaming as the light consumed the sky, spreading wings blacker than the night to cast unholy shade across their campsite. But the light from Travis's fireworks overpowered the rainbow strobe of the alien orb bearing down upon them, and they both watched it shrink back until it was the size of a basketball held up at arm's length above their heads, just above the reach of the fireworks' blooming flower. Eric snapped out of his spell to watch Travis as he lit the fuse of the final firework and retreated a few steps with his palms clasped to his ears and to watch the final colorful explosion light up the sky. But even before the last trickles of sparks had rained down from the spent explosion, the orb was magnifying again, snuffing out the rest of their campfire, and returning to cast its odd, blacklight luminance on their surroundings. They were defenseless now, with all their guns and fireworks proving powerless, and both Eric and Travis knew enough not to look up into the sky as the orb closed the distance between them. They only locked fearful eyes and said their last silent goodbye. But Eric registered Travis's covered ears for the first time and thought quickly, screaming at Travis to get his phone out and play his music. Travis seemed to understand what he was getting at before Eric had even finished vocalizing his final plea. He whipped out his phone and had his black metal music blaring at full volume from his phone's tinny speakers. And they watched as the light instantly swung away from them, bathing them in darkness again. And when they looked up from their coward positions on their knees, clutching each other's shoulders, the orb of light was no longer basketball-sized, but the size of a dime, streaking across the sky and over the mountain until it was out of sight or overpowered by the other star's twinkling radiance. And then they celebrated and danced in the music's heavy reverberations, and never before had Eric been so thankful to hear his friend's ear-splitting devil music. They spent the rest of the sleepless night clutching their loaded guns and taking turns holding up Travis's screaming, vibrating phone into the still night. And then dawn broke over the razor-sharp desert horizon, and Travis's phone threatened to die with 20% battery remaining. They packed up their things and hurried like they'd never hurried before, up the trail and back to their cars, keeping their heads down and their heavy metal bumping until they were safe in the parking lot. There they re-entered civilization and basked in the irritable scrutinization of the early morning hikers just arriving, and suddenly annoyed with the unsettled, unkempt energy of the teens, who had nothing better to do than defy the perfect sanctity of nature with their raucous totem of rock and roll.